All right, everybody. I am thrilled to be joined by Elizabeth Saunders. She is a professor of political science at Columbia University, where she directs the Saltzman Institute of War and Peace Studies. As you can imagine, her work focuses on international security, U.S. foreign policy, including the presidency and foreign policy and the politics of using force. That's not irrelevant today.
It's been busy.
I'll bet it has. I want to talk about what's going on right now, but before I launch right into that, you're a scholar. You've studied the use of force. You've studied the way presidents communicate into the run-up of international conflict and the way presidents behave in wartime. And I'm sure you've seen the same thing over and over and over and over again. Except I saw a post where you said this one terrified you more than anything. In what ways is this moment different from all the other moments America has been in an armed conflict?
Well, I think what's really striking, first of all,
First
thank
of all,
you.
I
Yeah.
apologize for that question. I assumed the answer in the question. Is it different than all the other ways? And if it is, yeah.
Yes, it is different. First, let me just say thank you for having me. Um, I think the way I think about this is that there have been many dangerous moments, and there were many dangerous moments in Trump's first term. But this is distinct even from Trump's first term. So I'm thinking here of North Korea and all of the whole first year of Trump 1.0 was preoccupied with North Korea and fire and fury like the
He
world has
went to the
never
UN. I
seen.
thought he was talking about nuking North Korea in his
Yeah.
speech at the UN.
And there was a lot of tweeting and threats by tweet, and then all of a sudden a bromance and a summit. And I've thought a lot about the comparison between then and now. And I think the really big difference is that there are virtually no constraints left on President Trump. And that sort of answers the question going back even further because most presidents have faced some form of constraint. And normally that comes, well, it should come from Congress in the first instance for the initiation of war and the conduct of war oversight and so forth. But that has sort of fallen by the wayside basically since the Iraq War. In the first term, though, it was still the case that President Trump had advisors around him that were not loyalists to him necessarily. They agreed to serve in his cabinet, but they didn't have a personal loyalty to him. So I'm thinking of James Mattis, the retired general that he tapped to be the Secretary of Defense, and so forth. And so they actually did, we know more and more from the reporting that's come out, constrain some of his most risky impulses. The North Korea case is a great example. So Trump wanted to use the so-called bloody nose strategy, where the idea was he was going to bomb North Korea with like a pinprick strike that would give them a bloody nose. That would bring them to the table. And then the peace talks would begin. And his advisors basically talked him out of it. And including the person he wanted to appoint as South Korea ambassador, Victor Cha, who wouldn't agree to that. And the administration then dropped his nomination. But nonetheless, like these were experts who could still exert constraint on Trump. And there were a variety of other reasons why striking North Korea was exceptionally risky. But you could imagine experts in the room talking to him. I think this time he has gone out of his way from the moment he won his second term to staff his cabinet and his political team with people who are completely loyal to him. And so the reporting indicates that the military did warn him about the Strait of Hormuz. They warned him that it would be very risky as an operation overall. The night before it started, if you remember, there was a series of leaks attributed, to Dan Kane or someone who, I assume it was either him or someone on his staff, saying we've warned this would be very risky. But that didn't stop him. And the reporting from the New York Times on the decision making leading up to it sort of just reinforces that nobody was really pushing back. JD Vance comes off as wanting to push back, but in a way that he kind of knows that it's not going to work. And And Trump decided to overrule the military objections, or just not accept the military objections and launch the operation anyway. So to me, the lack of constraint is really the thing that is very, very different this time.
It's terrifying. In addition to a lack of constraint, there seems to be a lack of objectives, a lack of, I mean, a target list is not a strategy.
No, absolutely not. And I think one way to think about this is the the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, also known as the Iran deal under President Obama, was far from perfect. It didn't deal with the ballistic missile problem, which has become a very, very big problem. It The cost of achieving it is actually more than people realize. I mean, taking Iran and cutting it off from the banking system by shutting down its access to the SWIFT financial
Mhm,
system
mhm.
uh, was caused an incredible amount of economic pain, and there were people who suffered terribly. On the other hand, it did achieve a diplomatic solution that involved intrusive inspections that Iran was complying with up until the point where Trump withdrew in his first term from the JCPOA. And so it's hard to uh, and since then, there's been a lot of back and forth and sort of trying to keep a lid on escalation between Trump and Iran. For example, after he ordered the killing of Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Quds Force, in January 2020. Um, so there's been a lot of uh, escalation risk that has been relatively well managed, and now and then he launched this Operation Epic Fury with, on the day he announced it, maximalist aims, right? Everything else was all about we have this specific demand about capping the nuclear program, or we're not going to escalate beyond. But he had never come out and said we are going to completely get rid of this regime. People rise up. I mean, he was making an existential threat to the regime, and if you do that, you back the enemy into a corner and they have nothing to lose. And in some ways, that's what unleashed the barrage of ballistic missiles all over the Gulf and on Israel and so forth, and Diego Garcia. Um, and it killing the Ayatollah, who I don't think anybody is mourning in the United, I mean, true in the United States, ordered truly terrible things, including the killing of tens of thousands of his own people in early January. But he was 86 years old, and now he's been replaced by his son. And even if the son is very injured, you've essentially replaced.
Prolong the regime.
Yes,
Let me turn this comment into a question.
Mhm.
Um, how would you assess the threat that Iran posed before the war and now? Because I think that goes at this question of
Yeah,
this regime change.
yeah. And I think, I, this is why these maximalist threats are so dangerous, right? If you say to a country, I want you to give up your nuclear program, that's a hard problem. It's historically very, very hard and takes coercion, but it's a defined problem. And Obama was able, at great cost and effort, cost in, Iranian suffering, right? Let's not sugarcoat
Yep,
it,
yep.
uh, to achieve that. Here, he starts out with the maximalist demand, bye bye Iranian regime, and he's immediately removed the incentive to control escalation. And then he's got to back into what his actual aims could be, but to achieve the same outcome, which is controlling the nuclear program. I mean, the details are somewhat different, but we have now cost all the lives that have been lost in the war, including in Lebanon, right? It's not, this is a much wider conflict, I think, than Trump anticipated. And the Strait of Hormuz is really the elephant in the room, right? It is the thing that was not in play before and is in play now. And as we tape this, right, Iran is saying that the strait is quote unquote open, and I do think you have to put it in quotes because it's not at all clear if they're going to charge a toll or if they're going to. They say that it has to be coordinated with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. So, what does that really mean? But it's not so much what's happening now, it's that the world cannot unsee what just happened, that Iran can close the strait if it wants to at really relatively little cost. It didn't do a whole lot in the very beginning to stop the tanker traffic. It made threats, it dropped a couple mines. You
If
just
you're an
didn't
insurance
know.
company and you
Yeah.
have a big boat full of oil, you're going to say, I'm not insuring that boat.
Or if you're a captain, you're not going to want to run the,
Yeah.
you know. So I think geography is a big immovable force. And in this case, it's it seems that he just did not look one step ahead, right?
But
And
surely he was warned about this. Every
yes, he
war
was.
game
He
said this would
was.
happen.
And also the decision making as reported in the New York Times, the military warned him about the strait, and I think he
Yeah.
thought it would be easy. And I chalk that up to the number one, the lack of constraint. There was nobody to follow him out of the situation room and say, look, you really can't do this without a plan for Hormuz, and there is no plan, so don't do it. And also, I think overconfidence after Venezuela, which was essentially a one night operation. He could declare it a success. We can debate if it was a good policy or not, but from a military standpoint, in his mind, I ordered this aircraft carrier to go, and then they gave me this wonderful operation. It worked, and nobody was killed, at least on the US side, and now Maduro's in jail. Let's try Iran next. So I think it's certainly the case. I mean, the strait has been known as a risk in military and security circles for decades. That's not new, but it just does not seem to have sunk in with Trump. And it's
Well,
it's
now,
very much a Rubicon that's been crossed here.
yeah, I mean, right, we can't, as you say, can't unsee it, and Iran can't unsee it either because they didn't close it before because they were afraid of what we might do, and now they've seen what we can do, and they're saying that's a price I can pay for closing the strait, and because they don't really care about their people. I mean, they're willing
Yeah,
to take
it's
this
the
hit.
regime. It's the regime. And
Right.
because he threatened the security and existence of the regime on the first day of the war,
Yeah.
then he tried to back away from it. And then when that didn't work, we had that terrible, terrible Tuesday. I mean, that day was really, I didn't know what to say to my students in my American foreign policy class when he
Well, it made you
announced,
sick, literally sick.
yes,
It
this
was
I'm
the
going to
worst
end the
day.
civilization. I mean,
Yeah.
how do you respond to that? I mean, it's not apart from the moral horror of it, right? Which I know you can't leave it aside, but just think about it from the perspective of Iran. I mean, it's like, and I do think the Iranians have always been going back to the first moment of the breach of the JCPOA when Trump withdrew from the treaty, from the agreement. They have been very careful to, I mean, again, not excusing what the regime has done to their own people, but just trying to explain the regime's actions. They are very careful about exactly how much they escalate and trying to keep a lid on this because what they want is sanctions relief ultimately.
Hmm.
They were not looking for this war. And so their response to the Soleimani killing was essentially to telegraph in advance where they were going to retaliate. Everybody knew they would
That's right.
retaliate,
That's right.
right? And then they lobbed ballistic missiles at a U.S. air base. It actually injured more American soldiers than Trump acknowledged at the time, but he tweeted, "All is well," right? It was like,
He doesn't really care about his soldiers either.
yeah, but it was very clearly designed to be face saving. Okay, we'll
Yep.
walk away from this.
Yep.
And the Ayatollah that was killed on the first day, the elder Khamenei, for all his many, I mean, again, not to excuse all the things that can be laid at his door, but he was one of those who was more restrained in terms of using Hormuz as a weapon because for all these
For all kinds
reasons,
of
right?
reasons. Right.
So once Trump goes maximalist,
They got nothing to
that
lose.
right,
Right.
exactly.
Right. So you said something earlier that surprised me that Trump did not expect this war to expand into Lebanon. What possible failure of imagination would him not leave him not thinking that Israel and Hezbollah would use this as an opportunity to uh, continue their unpleasant chat?
Well, I think it's the same that uh the same whatever it was, it's the same phenomenon as him not taking military advice to worry about what would happen to the
Mhm,
Strait of Hormuz. I don't
mhm.
think he thinks strategically even one step ahead. And so I think he had Benjamin Netanyahu coming over and saying it'll be easy. And it does seem like they knocked down a couple of the things that Netanyahu said like
The people in
internally.
the room, they say they did, but that
Yeah.
didn't matter to Trump. He left
Yeah.
and said,
Well,
yeah,
right.
we're going to have
And
regime
but it
change.
doesn't seem like Lebanon played into it at all. I mean, I
Yeah,
think he thinks he solved the post October 7th crisis with Israel. He thinks he solved it, right? It's one of the, what is he up to? He thinks he solved 8, 9 wars. I guess he thinks this one is, we got two ceasefires in this war so far, so he'll probably say 10. Um, but he thinks that war's over, right? So I don't know that he would have been thinking about Lebanon at all. But I mean, that's just pure speculation on my
yeah,
part.
yeah. I wonder, well, before I get to this, do you think we have fewer cards to play in our um, challenging relationship with Iran now than we did before this?
That's a great question. I mean, I think so because we've used an incredible amount of military firepower.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no doubt that the military successfully targeted all of these places and did a lot of damage. I mean, I think it's important to recognize that the Iranian regime is very much, Iran as a country, its infrastructure, its economy is damaged from all of this.
Hmm.
But when you unleash that kind of military power and you fail to achieve your objectives, partly because you don't really aren't really clear about what those objectives are, they survived this and our stocks are depleted. So, and even if our stocks weren't depleted, we'd have to go bigger or different next time. If this war restarts or
Well,
possibly.
so let's talk about what bigger and different mean, because Pete Hegseth, the um, Secretary of Defense, but he doesn't understand that. He continues to say, well, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, let's see, they live in Iran, so they drink water in Iran. So the water in Iran is a target, and I can end their desalinization programs and have all these people die of thirst. I mean, is that what we really mean by go bigger?
Well, it may be what Pete Hegseth thinks Trump wants to hear. Um, I don't know that I don't think that's what it really would mean. I think it would mean something like the seizure of some of the islands, not necessarily Karg Island, which got a lot of attention because it's where Iran exports its oil from, but it doesn't actually. The blockade is effectively doing
Same thing.
yeah, and
Sure.
there's no question. There were people who were calling for a blockade as soon as this all began to go sideways, right? So the blockade has had the effect of kind of it was a card that Trump has played and it
Yeah.
has gotten things back, but it's a bit like saying, you've got you're an arsonist and you light a building on fire and then get you don't call the fire department soon enough, it risks getting out of control. And now the fire trucks are in place and at least it's under control, but it's not out yet,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
we can't give them that much credit. But I think what would really bigger or different would mean ground troops somehow controlling the entrance to the strait, which is there's not really a great military option for that,
No.
and
And
it
you're
would be
creating a canal
horribly
zone there, and
yeah,
it's
but
big and mountainous and
that's it's
yes.
it's I mean it's also horrifying, but it's a different type of military
Yeah.
action
Yeah.
than just trying to do this all from the
Okay.
air.
Yeah. Wow. I'm impressed with the rest of the world. I mean, I read my Thucydides like everybody does, right? And I understand that ancient Greek civilization committed suicide because of something that happened on a little island called Corcyra, where they were worried about like boats, right? So the rest of the world looked at this and said, "Oh my gosh, this could really be a problem for the whole, not just an economic problem because of oil, a military problem for the whole planet." And I'm like, Europe said, yeah, no. And and Pakistan, not noted for its sensibilities about peace and war, said no. And China
Well,
said,
Pakistan has
you
also
know,
taken the lead in the diplomacy, which is
right,
interesting.
right,
Yeah.
right. While they're fighting in Afghanistan. I mean, who
Hmm.
knows? You know, the rest of the world, I mean, Russia and China said, yeah, you know what, we can help Iran a little bit, but they haven't, everybody has been sensible except us.
Well, we did start it. So, so I think there's a number of different, I mean, I agree that the rest of the world has sort of looked on in horror. Their reactions have all been slightly different, I would say. Europe is coming off this bruising wake up call from the Greenland
Oh, you
debacle.
mean we're being invaded from the east and now the US is trying to invade us from the west? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the other dynamic, so Europe is feeling very nervous and bruised and worried
Yep.
about Ukraine, and itself, but it also has not really turned up its defense capabilities. I mean, it doesn't have the hardware to do that much, right? It can allow the bases to be used, and Keir Starmer in the UK found a way around the, I won't let him use the bases for the war, but he can use them for defensive purposes. And a lot of these bombers have been taken off from RAF bases in Europe, in England, or the UK. But it's not clear that they could really get involved in ways that would be particularly helpful. So it's a little bit of a, I don't know. I think it's it's certainly correct what they've said in terms of the strategic, how difficult it is, but I think they also almost had the decision made for them by their own defense capabilities. So then you
Interesting.
get to Asia, and clearly those countries, I mean, Japan was out front immediately on the diplomatic side. They also don't have the capabilities for very different reasons, although they're thinking about getting some more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then I think the Gulf states see this as an existential threat, not just to their territory, but also to their entire business model and growth model, the lifestyle, the safety. And so I think everybody has a slightly different set of incentives and capabilities. And the UAE and the other Gulf states have a lot of money invested in the rest of the world, and so they have some leverage. And I think once the shock that Iran was going to strike them directly wore off, I think that, different countries mobilized behind the scenes in ways we don't fully understand. The Pakistani government emerging as the broker of peace talks is quite interesting, and I'm sure enraging Narendra Modi in India. It's a year since those two had a very serious conflict that escalated far beyond previous ones. And I will put in a plug for my students' podcast, Chalkboard Politics, which you can find online. And they interviewed a couple of India Pakistan experts who said that Pakistan's emergence from that conflict is really what gave it the clout to be able to play this role today. So that's an interesting development. But so I think the rest of the world collectively deserves a lot of credit, but they all got there by a slightly
Different
different
way.
paths.
Yeah. Yeah. But they were all worried about what could happen and tried to do.
Absolutely,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And they will have to play some role, right? Once we get to some sort of stable equilibrium, everybody has an interest in preventing this from happening again.
Maybe. I don't know what Bibi Netanyahu's
Well, I
incentives are.
wouldn't put him in the category of everyone, right? I'm
Okay.
talking about
Good.
of the two,
Of the
everybody except the two countries that launched the
that
war,
launched the
right?
war. Right.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
I,
So
I rest of the world is what I mean.
yeah, I think so too, because it's deeply
Yeah.
impactful of them. And I
Yeah.
mean, what are the implications of the US not spending 5 minutes to talk to its partners and allies before launching this war and plunging them into economic chaos?
Well, I think it's not just that we didn't talk to them. It's also that we've dismantled our diplomatic apparatus. I mean, our diplomatic capability is suffering uh, terribly. It's effectively been dismantled by Trump and Rubio. It's a little odd that Rubio wasn't even in Islamabad. He was with Trump in Miami at this UFC fight. Although he's now begun to convene these talks between Lebanon and Israel. But the way diplomacy normally works is like bricklaying, right? It's lower levels of contacts where you work out all the details. This is how the JCPOA was done. And only at certain points do you have the secretaries, even the Secretary of State or the Deputy Secretary of State, like that is a thing that you have to achieve something and then you get that person to come in. And only at the very end do you involve the president, right? It's
Well, explain why. Because the president says, like, I make the deals, I'm better at this than everybody, and I can go and get the deal they can't get. But your study of history and all this says that doesn't work.
it doesn't work. And
And,
I
and you
think
can see from Trump, we end up with worse deals.
yes, I think the North Korea example is really
I'm never
instructive.
going to let them get a nuclear weapon. Oh, wait, they have
Yeah,
one. Yeah.
well, so, but in that case, the North Koreans had the weapon, and that was not really on Trump. I mean,
Yep.
they
Yep.
had it. I forget the timing actually, but
Yep.
there's not much he could have done to stop them. But it's really hard to get other countries to do things that you don't want them to do. And once it's even harder to get them to undo something that they've already done. So there was never a chance, and there still isn't a chance of denuclearizing North Korea, right? But when he did finally get the summit on the books, Asia experts and nuclear experts said, look, we're not going to get a deal where he gives up his nukes. But if you want this to be a stable relationship, there is a deal where you could have verification. You could count them. You could
Right.
stabilize this relationship through a productive set of talks where the experts would talk about warheads and throw weights and all kinds of stuff that I don't even follow that
Ballistic
closely.
missiles and all of that.
Yeah, right. And so he went to Singapore and there was no staff work, right? He didn't do the spade work. At the time, the way we wrote about it was sort of like you have to eat your spinach diplomatically before you can
Hmm.
really, and he did
Hmm.
none of that prep work. And the Singapore summit produced almost nothing except the Hanoi summit, which then produced nothing.
Oh, on
So
the contrary, it gave Trump those nice love letters that he carries around with
yes, and
him.
Kim some legitimacy and
Yeah.
basically a free pass, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So
yeah,
counterproductive in every way.
exactly.
Yeah.
So the lack of diplomatic spade work, if you go straight to the top and you negotiate yourself, I do remember a high school history teacher, a favorite high school history teacher, always said, don't, when you become president of a country someday, don't do the negotiating yourself. Because you always want somebody to be able to say, well, okay, but I got to go check with the boss. It's convenient. It's a good way of actually achieving
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
who is Trump going to go ask? And even Vance Rubio, if you know that they're loyalists, there's no daylight between,
There's no daylight. There's
right.
no judgment.
So
Yeah. All right. Well, we've run out of time. This has been a fruitful conversation about a terrible moment in our history. And I really appreciate your insight and your experience and your willingness to share it with us.
my pleasure. I hope someday I get to come back on and talk about something a little more cheerful.
I would love that. So offline, let's talk about what that might be. Thank you, Elizabeth. Really
Thank
appreciate it.
you.